Welcome to the Communicating Earth podcast by Climate Acceptance Studios. This is the podcast by and for climate communicators. It gives me great pleasure for episode 2 to introduce Professor Ed Maibach. So he is the founding director for the George Mason University Centre for Climate Change Communication, and he's still an emeritus professor there. Welcome, Ed. How are you?
Excellent, Tom. So nice to be with you today.
Very good, very good. So let's dive straight into it. So we're a passionate believer in the overall communications principle that action inspires action. It's tales and stories of action that inspire action. So let's begin by saying, within your illustrious career, what's the most inspiring tale of action that you've been involved with or worked on?
Wow. Well, I have been so fortunate to be involved in lots of inspiring tales. But the one I'll answer with is around 2010. So that's 16 years ago now. I had the opportunity to introduce myself to America's TV weathercaster community. That's about 2,000 men and women from coast to coast whose job it is to essentially forecast the weather on TV a couple of times a day. And at the time when I first introduced myself to them, they were a community divided on the issue of human-caused climate change. 54% of them accepted the realities of human-caused climate change, and the rest were, to a greater or lesser degree, climate skeptics, which was pretty shocking because the American people at large, most of whom have no scientific training or no meteorologic training, even at that point, Americans were much more likely to accept the realities of climate change than were the TV weathercasters. But they welcomed me as one of their own. I had the opportunity, I still do, to work with them very closely. And the upshot of that collaboration is that now, 16 years later, TV weathercasters are reporting on the local impacts of global climate change more than 1,200% more frequently than they were when we first engaged with them. And that's just like half the excitement. This incredible increase in reporting by trusted local voices about the local impacts of global climate change. The other half of my excitement about this project is that climate skepticism that I mentioned a moment ago, it's been virtually dismantled in that community. By working with the community at large, we actually addressed the reasons why they were skeptical, and that skepticism has melted away. Today, more than 95% of that community are fully on board with the realities of human-caused climate change. And as I said, many, many of them are actively working to educate their viewers about the realities of its local impacts.
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it? I think that, that role specifically could be like a gateway into discussing it all. And I think there's also like a willful conflation and misreading of the difference between weather and climate by the forces of evil and so on. So it's good that those people can educate it in that way, and also placing a local context within a global framework, I think is really important. So yeah, like 1,200, that's amazing. What impact? Okay, so I first met you on a muddy field in Glasgow, outside the pollution pods, along with Alex, our producer in the background, actually, back in 2021. And that was my first sort of awareness of who you are. But why didn't you tell the listeners, what is it that you did? You are sort of semi-retired now, or maybe you're not. And what's the story behind how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, great question. I define myself first, foremost, and always as a public health professional. That has been the entirety of my 40-some-year career working on the world's big public health challenges. My specialty within public health is a very broad discipline. My specialty is the use of communication science in particular, to help sharpen up the communication. Because if we don't get the communication right, we almost always underperform in trying to avert public health problems. So that's what I do. 18 years ago, give or take, through no good planning of my own, I had the opportunity to hang out for 4 days with two of the world's leading climate scientists from the Potsdam Institute in Germany, and they actually were. It was a steady tour that I was on with other health professionals, and they were breaking down climate change for us to try to help us understand, what is it? What is climate change? What's causing it? What are the impacts? And what does the solution set look like? What can we do about it? And the opportunity to listen to them lecture over 4 mornings and then engage with them in the afternoons. We happen to be in the Dolomites, the Italian Alps, so it afforded a very nice opportunity to ask the professors questions in a very informal way. We climbed the Via Ferrata together, strapped to one another. That's a great opportunity for intimate conversation. But at any rate, after those 4 days, I had an epiphany at the end of those 4 days. The epiphany being, this is the world's biggest public health challenge, this climate change. And if we don't get this right, all of the other things that I had ever worked on, all of those gains that I had helped contribute to in terms of HIV prevention and reducing rates of tobacco use and fighting the early days of the anti-vax movement, all of those things would be essentially wiped out because the impacts of climate change on human health were going to be that profound. So that's how I got to where I am today. I actually changed jobs I moved from one university to another because I wanted to embed myself with climate scientists so I could continue to learn more and continue to draw on their knowledge, their evolving knowledge about the changing climate. And find a way to be useful, find a way to turn my public health communication skill set into improving and amplifying climate communication.
So I think a challenge that we face as climate communicators is that one could argue that it's everything, right? It's the whole world. So I'm really interested in how you specifically define within your public health context. How do you define climate communications?
Climate change is affecting everything. You're absolutely right. And so, on one hand, that is a challenge. On the other hand, it's an opportunity, frankly, because most people think of climate change as a threat to the environment, a threat to plants, penguins, and polar bears. And that is not a particularly engaging mental framework in which to understand this multifaceted problem. So, the opportunity that affords us is we can shine a light on the other ways in which global climate change is relevant to the lives of people today. And that really has been a major inspiration for my work. But to answer your question directly, the way I define climate communication, or the task of climate communication, climate change is complicated, and climate solutions are complicated, and complication is the anathema to human understanding. The more complicated something is, the less likely we are to want to devote the mental energy to really understand it. So, from a communication perspective, I see my job as to help people simplify an otherwise complicated set of issues. And this is particularly important, not only to simplify it, but to simplify it appropriately. We can't, communication and education are two different things. Education is long form, right? We go to school for 12 years, and then if we're lucky, we go to university, and maybe we even get to go to graduate school post-university. That's education. Communication is by its nature short form. It happens in bits and pieces here and there. And so the goal of effective communication is to help people simplify complex issues appropriately so that they can make better decisions about what, if anything, they want to do about it.
So who are you communicating to then? Was it, owners of hospitals or doctors or patients? Like where were your efforts being pointed?
Our center, which we actually call a think and do tank, um, it's an academic research center, yes, but we've always, as sort of implied by your question, we have always had as a goal to reach out and effectively communicate with various different audiences. Um, our work is less focused on public audiences and more focused on what we consider trusted voices, communities of practice who have a special opportunity to help the public and policymakers simplify appropriately. So, yes, TV weathercasters were one of those audiences that I've spent a lot of time communicating to and with. Health professionals, my people, I've spent a lot of time engaging with them and trying to help them use their trusted position in their communities to help people understand climate change as a human health threat and climate solutions as a human health opportunity. We also have a member of our team as a former Republican member of the US Congress, and his primary target audience is climate concerned Republicans, climate concerned conservatives, because they are relatively rare. They are in the minority among conservatives, and he is particularly interested in helping them as members of their conservative community give voice to why they are concerned about climate change and what they would like to see done about it. So I would say those are the three target audiences that I spend the most time with. But we also communicate a lot with climate scientists, people who we need to know what they know, and we work to coach them to become better, more effective communicators.
So how do you do that then? What form does that coaching take? I mean, all these people here like are super, super busy, really stretched. Some of them quite high status. They've got other commitments. Firstly, how do you find the time to persuade them to devote to this? And then what's the actual process that you went through?
Yeah.
Nuts and
Um,
bolts.
I I like to disentangle two interrelated challenges. If the work is going to be effective, if we're going to change what these trusted voices are doing in terms of what they're communicating, we first, as sort of implied by your question, Tom, the first challenge is we gotta win their hearts and minds. Like we have to make sure that they are eager, they're motivated, they want to do this. Because if they don't want to do it, you're absolutely right. They've got 1,000 other things on their to-do list, and this is never going to rise to the top 10. So the first challenge is effectively motivating people. The second challenge, which is totally distinct, is actually helping motivated people change what they do, change their behavior. So, with regard to TV weathercasters, the way we started that process of bringing them on board with this notion that because they're so highly trusted in their community, and we know that from our survey data, by the way, the reason we focused on TV weathercasters in the first place is because our surveys of the American public identified TV weathercasters as a highly trusted source of information about global warming.
Oh, that's very
So,
interesting.
yeah, so the next thing we did is we surveyed the weathercasters. As I said before, we found out that about half of them were accepted the realities of human-caused climate change, and to a person, they wanted to actually start educating their viewers about the local impacts. But also to a person among that half of the community, they were not really doing it yet. And none of them in 2010 were doing it on air, which is the platform, it's their broadest platform by which to reach a broad public audience. So we knew that they were already motivated. What we did next was in our surveys, we asked, well, you clearly are motivated to do this work. What's holding you back? And the things that they told us that were the barriers, the impediments to them educating their viewers were really pretty simple, things that we felt we had the ability to help them with. Things like localized climate impact data. So our very first weathercaster we worked with was in the Columbia, excuse me, the Columbia, South Carolina media market. South Carolina is a deep red state. The Columbia media market, a little less deep red than the rest of the state, but nevertheless quite conservative. And the weathercaster there, Jim Gandy, said, "Look, I don't even have localized data. So if I'm going to tell the story of how climate change is influencing our weather here, I need localized data." And we said, "Well, we can help you with that." We took data that was data that is residing within NOAA, and we did the downscaling to actually show uh, show Jim exactly what kinds of weather patterns were changing over the past number of decades as a result of global climate change. The next thing Jim said he needed was he didn't have graphics support. He didn't have a way to turn that data into visually appealing, visually clear
Okay.
representations that he could, project onto his green screen in order to tell the story about how climate change, global climate change, is changing the weather there in Colombia. And then the third thing that he said he needed was he didn't have real access to climate scientists. So, to the extent that he had questions, he wanted to be able to access climate scientists to work, to pose his questions and get answers so he could become a more confident and competent climate communicator. And we knew we could help him with that too. So, we essentially built this climate reporting resources program for TV weathercasters to help them bridge their motivation and put it into action. We took one final step, and that was we went to the TV weathercasters meetings. Every year, there's two different TV weathercaster meetings. The American Meteorological Society hosts one of them, and the National Weather Association hosts another. We would go to their meetings and host either day-long or half-day-long workshops to actually help the interested weathercasters refine their skills and become more confident in their climate communication skills in the context of their peers. So in these workshops, for example, we actually had them produce a story. We brought big, 2 by 3 feet um, uh, uh, graphics mounted on
Hmm.
poster boards, and we had them produce stories as if it was live on TV, and then their peers would critique the way they presented that story and give them opportunities to sharpen the story up. And as it turns out, these workshops by design were a whole lot of fun. They make people nervous, but we all laughed at ourselves, we laughed at each other, we laughed together. And having that kind of social experience to build these climate communication skills made all the difference.
So you feel the need to actually be with them there in person in a group in the same room. Could you see a future where, for example, it could be replicated online, or do you need that like intimate human connection, do you think?
Well, I am a big believer in intimate human connection. So I think it helps a lot during the early days of the pandemic, when we could no longer be in person with them. We actually did move these trainings online, and they
Okay.
were still quite successful. But that magic, the magic
Yeah.
was just a little muted because it just isn't the same thing coming together in a Zoom room.
So would you say this is the biggest success of your career, the thing that you're most proud of?
I am pretty darn proud of it, but I'm pretty darn proud of some other things that we're currently still doing and some
Okay.
things from my prior career in public health. I won't, this is about climate communication, but I will say that having the opportunity to work um, back in the late 90s and early aughts on an anti-tobacco campaign targeting America's teens and preteens called the Truth Campaign was wildly successful. It stands as the most effective public health communication campaign in American history to this day. And that, I have to say, I'm pretty darn proud of having been involved in that.
And interesting seeing your career because there's been a much quoted parallel in the PR tactics of the fossil fuel industry now replicating what the tobacco industry was doing 20 or 30 years ago. They're following quite a sort of similar playbook, aren't they?
They sure are. And one of the taglines that we used in the Truth anti-tobacco campaign is their brand is lies, our brand is truth. And that was so spot on in terms of speaking to young people to encourage them not to start smoking. And I think it is also spot on in terms of the way you know, big oil and gas companies are operating. Their brand is lies, our brand in climate communication is truth.
And I think that's why we're being successful, right? Because even though they've got maybe 100 times the budget, the truth is very powerful, I think. That's my hope anyway.
Yeah, and if I could tell another an ancient story from public health history here in the U.S. In the late, I think it was 1968 to 1970, 71, 72, when I was a wee lad, the the tobacco industry was airing a whole lot of TV ads trying to convince us to either start smoking or to change to their brand. And there was a law in U.S. that the U.S. Congress had put on the books back, I don't even know back how much earlier it was, but it was called the Fairness Doctrine, the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission's Fairness Doctrine.
Okay.
And the Fairness Doctrine back in 1968 was interpreted in the following way. They the Federal Communication Commission mandated that for every 7 ads that a TV network accepted from the tobacco industry, they were required to accept a public service advertisement, a non-smoking, non public service advertisement. So it was 1 to 7, which sure looks to me like sort of a David versus Goliath kind of formula ratio. But even though they were only forced to air one PSA for every 7 paid marketing ads, it was so successful. Those messages were so impactful in turning Americans away from smoking that the tobacco industry voluntarily withdrew its right to advertise their products on TV because they didn't want to continue to enable the anti-tobacco movement, even at a 1 to 7 ratio. And I think, to me, that is such an inspiring case study of where, even when the odds were against us, when we get the communication right, we can have a huge positive impact.
Yeah, just when you have that coughing fit when you wake up in the morning, I think it's our role to, like, when that wildfire or flood hits us, that people are realizing that it's to do with the parts per billion of carbon in the atmosphere. That is like such a big challenge, though, to bridge that gap. But it's working, like 89% projects and so on. It's really good. What do you think is what's the biggest professional challenge you've faced specifically within climate communications? Either a specific thing or a sort of a general thing.
Okay, this is going to make me sound like a whinger, and I hate to whinge publicly, but the biggest challenge, to be honest, is funding. The governments tend not to fund climate communication, and the philanthropic sector does fund climate communication, but they fund it at such a small level that 1 to 7 ratio in the tobacco wars that I mentioned a moment ago, we are nowhere near the 1 to 7 ratio. The big oil and gas they have so much money to convince the public of their point of view. Their point of view, as they see it, is, oil and gas is what creates prosperity in the world, has created the prosperity in the world that we have, and will continue to create prosperity for generations to come. We can't do without it, and there are no good alternatives. So that is essentially a message that we are being bombarded with 100 times a day. At least I am being bombarded with it 100 times a day. Sometimes I feel like they know who I am and they're targeting me, but I know that they just sort of know who I am demographically. And they're targeting everybody like me demographically with those 100 messages a day. How many times do we reach people with climate communication? I happen to know the answer with regard to Americans because we ascertain that in our surveys, our climate change in the American Mind surveys. And the average American hears about climate change in the media, like, only a couple of times a month. Or at
Mm.
least they remember hearing about it in the media only a couple of times a month. And they hear the people in their social network talking about it at more or less the same rate. So here in the US, we say there's a climate silence in America. And if we're going to help Americans understand the realities of climate change and the profound opportunities associated with climate solutions, we need to turn up the volume. We need to turn up the message repetition. In the communication field, they call it reach and frequency. Gross rating points is how advertisers talk about it. We need to turn up those gross rating points, if you will, if we're going to succeed in building adequate public will to demand political solutions, policy solutions. You have to have a very strong public will in order to build the necessary political will. So what is lacking is the financing to do the climate communication.
And it's crazy, right? Because ultimately, all the funders out there, what are they funding? They're funding social change. And if we follow the proven principle that tales of action inspire more action, if you're taking action on some sort of level, And if you communicate it effectively, then you're inspiring other people to action on projects that live beyond the remit of that funding, and you set off chains of events. So it's like it's the last thing that should be cut rather than the first.
Yeah. Yeah.
To show people around the world that there is loads of action being taken, and so that inspires them to maybe realize that they're not alone, and so they're more inclined to achieve the things that we want people to achieve.
Yep.
Okay, so here we go. Quick fire round. So shoulders back. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Um, right. What's the first word that comes to mind when I say climate?
Big question mark, because the first word is change. So, but that sounds so unoriginal. But that is the first word that comes to mind.
So are you an activist, a campaigner, an advocate, an environmentalist, or something else?
Yes.
You're
All of the
something else.
above.
All
All
of
of
the
the
above.
above.
If you were going to pick one, what would it be?
I am a climate communication scientist who focuses his work on actually activating trusted voices in the real world.
Very good. Who for you is your biggest inspiration in this sector?
Oh, no question. Catherine Hayhoe, the climate
Okay.
scientist that I know, who is the best student of the science of climate communication and the best, she is so good at applying that science in her work. And she's built a huge following through her personal and professional charisma, her identity. She leans into her identity as a climate scientist, as an evangelical Christian. Um, and she's just relentless. She just keeps at it day after day, month after month, year after year, and she's really playing such an important role.
I have a dream that one day she's going to be a guest on this podcast.
Oh, she
Um,
will if you invite her.
oh, very good, very good. Is there a particular book or a movie or a TV show that you can think of about climate that inspired you, you'd like our listeners to know about?
Oh boy, there are so many cringeworthy ones, but the one that inspired me the most, I would say, is Ministry for the Future, because it is a hard read. It's real, it's brutal. It looks at the truth of climate change as it's going to play, as it may play out over the next decade or a couple of generations, but it also tells a tale that there is a hopeful arc to that tale, that human civilization can rally and can make a difference. And I think that's the most important message we can convey right now. We collectively can link arms, lean in, and make a difference. We can limit the warming to the fullest extent possible if we try.
And that was the choice of Steph Speck in episode 1 of our very young podcast.
Nice.
Interesting. I've clearly got to read it now. What's your favorite communications channel?
Oh, I like to sit down at the kitchen table and with a cup of tea and have a nice chat with somebody.
And do you think that's also the most effective communications channel?
100%. There is no communication more effective than having a conversation with somebody so that we can listen to their point of view and introduce our point of view and find ways of connecting and reaching a common understanding. It's very hard to do that through mediated channels.
Do you have a favorite stat, a statistic, or a fact?
Yeah, I do. I because I spend a lot of time with my colleagues in the health community, and because they are so many of them are so climate concerned, and they see that we are about to breach the 1.5 degrees of warming, and it makes them feel a sense of defeat, a sense of doom, and a sense of hopelessness, and that those are bad feelings, and hopelessness is the anathema to action. People have to be hopeful to take action. So that's the statistic or the number that I introduce them to every time is every 1/10 of 1 degree of warming that we can prevent counts. It's a profound gift to the health and well-being of our children, our grandchildren, and their children and grandchildren. So yes, we may well be breaching 1.5 degrees, and we may eventually even breach 2 degrees of warming, but we need to continue to fight to shave off the top of the warming curve every 1/10 of a degree that we can. And the IPCC is the unimpeachable source that I use to back up that claim. They did a a report in 2018, I think, called the IPCC Special Report on 1.5 degrees C. Really quite a title, but it's a very important report.
Um, what's the one climate myth or that piece of information out there that's in culture that you'd like to permanently retire, eradicate forever?
I'm going to see if I can say it without actually saying it, because if I say it, then I'm just activating it in people's minds. Um, Climate solutions, particularly clean energy, clean, healthful pro- energy that creates incredible prosperity, is cheaper than the alternative, the dirty fossil fuels that we've been burning. And so I would like to see that as a simple, clear message that is repeated over and over and over again by every trusted voice on the planet. We have this extraordinary opportunity in front of us, and that is to complete the inevitable transition to a clean energy economy. And the sooner we do it, the healthier we will be, the more prosperous we will be, the more security each of our communities and our nations will have.
Is if there's one thing within our sector of climate communications, that you could change, what is that one thing to have the most impact?
I'm going to go back to my prior answer. I really, really encourage philanthropic funders and governments,
Mhm.
not just federal governments, but states, provinces, local governments, to put more money into communication. Tom, what you said before was so on the nose, and it made me remember what Margaret Mead said during her lifetime, that never underestimate the the what did she say? Never underestimate the potential of a few concerned citizens to change the world.
Yeah.
Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And if you don't show examples of concerned citizens creating change, it's pretty hard to inspire others to get involved and also fight to create change.
Finally, what's your number one source of climate information?
Oh my gosh, that's an impossible question for me to answer. I live in the most vibrant climate communication ecosphere that you could ever imagine. It's 24/7, 365. I get it from journals, I get it from professional colleagues, I get it from the news media. But I'm going to answer your question anyway. I'm going to say, because you're British, I'm going to say The Guardian is my number one favorite, because I
Okay.
think The Guardian is killing it. Their climate reporting is absolutely unparalleled.
Very good. So that's the end of the quickfire round. Not so quickfire, but we're still experimenting with this format. So maybe we need to, but yeah, let's drive it forward. Why do you think, Ed, that more action is not being taken in the face of increasingly insurmountable evidence?
Because the opposition to taking action is so wealthy, is
Mm.
so well funded, has been focused on this threat for more than 5 decades. Fossil fuel companies, big oil and gas companies, that industry has known this day was coming for 5 or 6 decades, and they have been doing everything in their power to use their fiscal resources to forestall what needs to be done, including as I like to say, including renting a whole lot of powerful friends in political office in countries around the world. So the industry denial, the industry efforts to forestall action, the industry efforts to rent powerful friends who are their most potent tool in forestalling smarter public policy. They've just been at this for so long, and they're so well financed. So it's just, coming back to the analogy of David versus Goliath, if we are David, the Goliath that we are up against is a hegemon of almost unimaginable proportion and strength.
Have you ever? I mean, I know that you've moved in very interesting circles. Have you ever been at a conference or been at a dinner party or a soiree with the people who hold the purse strings to those budgets? Have you ever had any sort of relationships with any of them professionally?
Yeah, people who potentially fund climate communication.
Yeah, the director of
Yeah.
comms for ExxonMobil and people like that.
No, no, I've never had the opportunity to have a real conversation with any of those people, but I have had many opportunities to have real conversations with people whose job that used to be. In other words, people who have left the
Okay.
fossil fuel industry from in very senior positions, and who feel, personally quite appalled by the role that their industry played in holding human civilization back from doing what is necessary. And boy, the truth they tell is incredibly revealing, but also incredibly discouraging in the sense that they say, look, Ed, you're not. I'm of the belief that if you have opposition, you should talk to the opposition in addition to fight the opposition.
Hmm.
If you, of course, we should fight them because we need to prevail, but maybe if we talk to them, we can find common ground that we can move forward with. And the people who've left the industry are basically pretty not encouraging when I explore this possibility of having a productive conversation with representatives of industry. So it leaves us without the ability to have meaningful conversation with them. So we have no choice but to fight them.
I'm just really interested at what actually goes through their heads from day to day. What do they think about when they're going to sleep at night? Because ultimately, it's going to affect them as well. Maybe it's just because they think they're above it because they've got so much money. But I'm endlessly sort of morbidly fascinated about what's
Well,
going on inside their minds.
yeah, yeah. There is so much research coming out of the field of evolutionary biology and psychology that confirms, I think, what we all know to be true, which is the reason we can lie so well to others is because we lie so effectively to ourselves. When, to come back to Al Gore's, the title of Al Gore's documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, when we don't like the facts, it's easy for us to dismiss them and create an alternative story to tell ourselves to make what we are, to justify what we really want to do anyway. So, the whole notion of climate denial, it really, it doesn't just happen. You have to really invest in it in order for it to catch on. And the industry has invested a lot in climate denial, and it has found purchase in far too many people's minds. But as the story I told earlier in the hour revealed, even people who have been victim of that misinformation campaign can be turned around if you create the right conditions by which to share your point of view with them.
Okay, little thought experiment. Right now, every single person whose professional career is climate communications is listening. What would be the one strategy that you would like to tell them all that they should all focus on?
Yeah, I'm going to now a tip of the hat to Catherine Hale again because I she this is her recommendation and she bases her recommendation on our research, so it's a bit meta here. But the recommendation is, look, there is a climate silence in incredibly important places, and do everything you can to break that climate silence by encouraging everyday people to give voice to their concerns about climate change and to give voice about the kinds of actions that they would like to see taken, and specifically to aim their voice right at the people we have put in office, both elected officials and appointed
Mm.
officials, to let them know what we want them to do, and especially perhaps aim your voice at people who are seeking to be put into office, who are seeking to earn our votes. Perhaps our greatest point of the ordinary person's greatest point of leverage is to use their voice to convince people who need them that if you want my help, you need to do this because this is what I think needs to be done.
So much more important than recycling. you know.
Yes.
Um, uh, and I suppose that covers the next question. Like, the most important environmental message you think the public need to hear. What do you think that is? Is it just simply to go to your leaders, contact your leaders?
The that and that the things that we need our leaders to do um, will create a better world for us, and it will, that better world will start to manifest very quickly. So as we clean up the world's energy supplies, pivoting away from dirty energy and towards clean energy, Yes, we're going to limit the global warming, and that's going to have benefits over decades and centuries and millennia. But we're also going to enjoy cleaner air and cleaner water right away, which is going to allow us to enjoy better health right away. So focus on the benefits of the necessary actions, particularly the health benefits, because the health and well-being benefits, because they people don't like deferred people don't like to invest in things that don't benefit them until over the long run. We're much more comfortable investing in things that we benefit from quickly, and the investors benefit from directly.
Yeah, I worked on the ultra low emission zone expansion in London to cover the outer reaches of London. And it's been an absolute unqualified success. And even me personally, I now live outside of London, but when I go back into London, it's just a nicer air to breathe. It's so obvious. And it's backed
Yes.
up by all of the data and the research as well. So I
Yeah.
think that's an incredibly important point. People
Yep. And
see solving a climate crisis as some sort of distant, strange thing, but it isn't. It's next week. It's very powerful. Is there a particular like go-to metaphor or analogy that someone could find out about that would be helpful in their climate communications work?
there is a metaphor that has been around for a very long time. I think the research that suggested the value of this metaphor was done in the year 2000, and that is, well, how does heat trapping pollution actually work? And the metaphor is burning fossil fuels emits heat trapping pollution, which is creating a thicker blanket of heat trapping gases around the planet. And that is, the thicker that blanket gets, the more the earth will warm. So our job, our most fundamental necessity, is to try to stop emitting that heat trapping pollution as quickly as possible. And then, or in addition to also taking actions that will help to draw that heat trapping pollution back out of the atmosphere and put it back in the ground where it started. So, reforestation is and smart land use are two ways that we can do that. So I really like that metaphor because it's been shown to help people think more clearly about why greenhouse gas pollution is actually creating global warming.
What's that one learning or one piece of wisdom that you can take from your career that you could now give to, say, someone who's just starting their career in climate communications?
It would be the same. It would be the same advice that I've given to people starting their careers in public health for the last 40 years, which is that nobody who works on climate change or nobody who works on public health ever has a midlife crisis. This is such important work that we get up each and every day completely energized to go at it yet again, despite the frustrations, because we know that it's super important. It must be done. And we are privileged to have the opportunity to earn a paycheck so that we can pay our rent and feed our family, and at the same time fight humanity's biggest problem.
So we finish each podcast with the same question because this is all about like people's like working day. Um, as far as climate communications is concerned, what's next on your to-do list? What's the next thing you're going to be doing?
In 17 minutes, I'm going to be joining a conversation with other professors at my university about pandemic preparedness. Unfortunately, climate change isn't the only major threat we face, and we are trying to become more. We're trying to contribute to a greater degree at my university in terms of helping our nation and helping the world become more ready to address the next pandemic that arises. So back to my core discipline of public health communication.
And I feel very pleased that I've given you a quarter of an hour break so you can prepare. So Ed, it's been an honor. I really appreciate your time, and thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure, Tom. Thank you so much. Great conversation.